Okay, so welcome along everybody to our Writing Your Methodology writing circle. My name's Kerry. Nice to have you all along. We are going to get started. I think a few more people will come in slowly, but we're going to start right on time because there's a lot to do. Okay. All right, just to get us started, QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning, and QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. So today's resources very shortly will be up on Blackboard or the slides. My lovely colleague, Dr. Murray Lane, who's sitting in with us today, he's organising that for me right now. So they will be up. I'm sure Murray will let us know when they're there because there is a lot of content, obviously. So it's good for you guys to have access to that. So that will be up shortly and the recording will go up maybe this afternoon, if not in the morning, but I will email you all to let you know when it's all ready. So this is a writing circle today. We do have workshops in our writing program. The workshops look at the theory and principles of writing practices and include peer discussions in breakouts. Writing circles, more interactive with exemplars, practical activities, checking your own writing, and you're actually going into a breakout today too. So that's exciting. All right, our goals for today, quite broad, looking at the elements of methodology chapters or sections if you're doing a research proposal, and looking at some strategies to clearly explain and justify your research methodology. We're going to have a lot of examples today. I've figured that that's one of the best ways to help you guys with your writing and to understand the way these sections need to be looking. Even if you're not at the data collection stage or you're still in the planning stage, you know, everything that we're talking about today will be relevant in some way. Yes, go Buddy Franklin, that's it. That's the first time anyone's ever mentioned that about that image. I use it all the time. I'm not sure who that was. Oh, it was Murray. He did kick 1,000 goals. All right, so a lot to do. I've split into the sections regarding based on our goals. We're going to examine exemplars and we will have time for a Q&A. So some questions to start you thinking. I would like you to jot down what your underpinning philosophy as a researcher is. If you know, you might not know, and that's okay. That's something we're going to talk about today. How do we gain empirical knowledge? How do you think that we find out things that we don't already know? So that will be your philosophy. I also want you to think about and write down the tools that you're going to use or have used to collect and analyze your data. And we're going to come back to these a little later. All right, do you have your own draft handy? Hopefully you do. You don't need to share that. It's just for you to write some notes in. And as I said, we'll be examining exemplars and breaking into small groups. And we're going to do a lot of analysing together as well. So this is just a little outline for you on the exemplars and examples. I'm actually going to pop the activity sheet in now to the chat. Let's have a look where it is. There it is. All right, so that's downloading now. And that information there is in the activity sheet there too. So you can see we've got two examples that we'll analyze later, and also I've used quite a few different examples. So I've just given you a little outline there of those examples, just so that you can go and find them if you want to, or whatever you want to do there. All right, so QT ePrint's a really good resource for you guys. So if you haven't been in there, please go. That's where I get a lot of my examples from. You'll see you can choose your thesis format that you want that fits with what you're doing. So use that resource. Poll question. Righto, so thanks, Murray. The ePrints link is there. So we're going to do this poll right now just to get a gauge of who we've got here, what you guys are up to. No right or wrong here. It's anonymous. No one will know that it's you. You can only put one answer though. All right, I think that's most of you now. All right. Okay, so can you see those results there? So what have we got? A few case studies, a few interviews, computer modeling. I've got someone doing ethnography, someone doing surveys. Okay, good. So we've got a good range. All right, let's keep going. Oh, some people with mixed. Excellent. All right, so let's look at some key terms now. What I wanted to tell you as well is this is a huge topic. You're all from different fields of study. We need to keep everything quite broad for that reason. This is a lot about the key reminders about important aspects of your research design and posing questions for you to go back and check your document and just have a think about. Always check with your supervisor if you're not sure. If I recommend something, they might not recommend it. So of course, always go with them. And also what you need to include and how long it is will also depend on what you're writing. Are you writing a journal article, a proposal, a final thesis? There's also a few things we're not going to go into, and that's research question development, theories, because there's just so many. So just bear that in mind. This is a really broad overview with lots and lots of examples. All right, so let's have a look. So everything is underpinned by your empirical world view. So what's your philosophy? How do you think that we gain new knowledge? Okay, now that will then lead to whether you're a qualitative researcher, a quantitative researcher, or like some of you, you're doing mixed methods, so a bit of both. So then from there, the approach becomes the methodology. So the methodology is the overarching strategy that then underpins the steps that you're going to use to collect and analyze the data. And everything needs to connect clearly and justifiably and appropriately to your research aims and your research questions, of course, as well. All right, so a little bit to take in there, but there's some examples there of methodologies. Okay, so get your head around that. So we go worldview, under that is our research approach, qualitative or quantitative. Under that is the type of qualitative or quantitative methodology you're doing. And then we go, next slide, then we're on to research methods, right? So now your methods are how you are exactly collecting and analyzing the data. It's the instruments, the data collection tools, it's your analysis strategies, your sampling. So all of that is obviously connected and flows down from, let's go back, philosophy, research approach, qualitative, quantitative, or mixed, methodology, and then how you're going to exactly do the study. So it's really important that you get that very clear in your mind, because that's probably going to be the best way for you to present. Okay, present everything you're saying. You're going to start broad and then you're going to narrow down, right? You wouldn't put your philosophical worldview at the end. All right, and just a little tip there to respondent and participant, two different things. Respondents respond to surveys, participants are in interviews, focus groups, that sort of thing. So they're not really interchangeable, okay? So be clear on those. All right, so maybe you're still deciding. Maybe you don't exactly know what you're doing yet. Maybe you've got some ideas. Maybe you know exactly what you're doing, and maybe you've already even done it. So as I said, we're all going to be at different stages. So if you've already done it, how did you find out what was going to be the best way? What were your strategies to come up with your research design? If anyone wants to share in the chat, please do. From my perspective, we gain knowledge by reading, by asking questions. You really need to get some books, would be my advice. Examine what previous researchers have done as well. Yep, so someone is saying they discuss with their supervisors. Perfect. Using the same methods as other authors. Yep. Sometimes your research problem or your research questions will give you a pretty good clue. We're usually developing those things simultaneously, of course, because they do go exactly together. So if you're doing experiments, if you have to measure variables or measure relationships, potentially you're doing quant, aren't you? If you're interested in people's lived experiences or want to gain insight into some kind of phenomenon, you're probably going to do qual, maybe. If you've got a really big question and then you want to narrow down further, so you just need to feel the lay of the land and then you're going to narrow down, then maybe that's where you might do mixed. You might do qualitative, some kind of interviews and then a big survey, or the other way around. You might do a survey to figure some things out and then get deeper into it with some interviews. A few people in the chat, thank you. Meetings with experts on Indigenous methodologies, beautiful. I built a failed case study, revised all the pitfalls. Yeah, great. Discussion with supervisors after reading, asking questions. Yeah, perfect. Good, good, good. Someone in the chat, I'm looking at royal commissions, case studies, interviews with staff. Yeah, so, you know, you guys know all about your research topic and you're learning more and more. So everything has to link and go together, right? That's really important. So the big question then, are you going to be qualitative, quantitative, or are you going to do mixed? So it's going to depend on other things as well, not just your topic, of course. How much time do you have? If you're doing an MPhil, you don't have that much time. Potentially, it's not going to work to do a mixed methods. Maybe though, you might be able to achieve that. What's your previous research? I know for me, I decided to do qualitative and quantitative. I decided to do a survey, had never done that before, so I had to learn how to do that. But I did learn that skill, so that was a good thing. But you might prefer to do something you've done before rather than to learn some whole new way of researching. Sometimes your supervisors will guide you. They'll want you to do something that they're, you know, knowledgeable on. And of course, as we said, your research aims and questions. So if you're leaning towards the idea of mixed, you just need to be really careful and make sure you can justify it. Don't just do it for the sake. That's something examiners will really look at is it justifiable? Was it worthwhile doing the two different types? And the other thing with mixed methods, at some time, you have to mix them, okay? So if that's maybe in the data collection stage, in the analysis stage, in the interpretation stage maybe, but it's definitely something that you need to tell your readers. And as always, no matter what you do, and I'm going to keep saying this, is you must justify your choices over and over again. Books. Okay, I do talk about books a lot, don't I? They're pretty good. It's how we get knowledge. So look, this is a little tiny number of books. Most books at the library are ebooks these days. You know, that's just a little tiny snapshot. There's so many of them. You've probably got your favorite ones. I've got 3 Creswell there. Some people love Creswell, some people hate Creswell. If you're not a qualitative researcher, or even if you are, just maybe double check with your supervisor whether they like Creswell. So some people think that he's used way too much, but I think he's great. But you can, you know, you can figure out what you want to do, whether they have him in or not. All right, so that was a few basics. We're going to come back to those basics as we go through. As we're looking at the elements. All right, so let's think about this. Oh, good. Someone said, so their supervisor said Creswell was the Bible. Wow, awesome. As I said, though, I think one of my colleagues told me a story that their lecturers said they would give people $100 not to use Creswell, something like that. So yeah. Not sure what it is about him that I like. I guess it's very well explained. I don't know why people don't like him. Maybe because he's oversighted. Anyway, as we said, every single chapter and section has a purpose, right? So what's the purpose of your research design or your methodology or whatever you're going to call it? Remember that scaffolding and those levels. So readers need to know every step. They need to see your critical thinking demonstrated. They need to see that the results and the interpretations are trustworthy. They want to know whether that you can implement a study in an ethical and robust way, and that you've been able to contribute new and significant knowledge. Remember, this is a training degree that you're doing, so it's very awkward in a way, because you have to do this research project, yet you're still learning how to do the research project at the same time. Massive learning that we do. So you're demonstrating your deep understanding of the selected methodology and the methods, and also how you've been able to minimize any disadvantages to your methodology or methods. And you're showing that you're an expert in the field and that you can link everything together, the aims, the worldview, the design, the approach, and on. I like that quote there about it's a delicate dish of knowledge. It's like a recipe, all the necessary ingredients and how they need to be combined. This is the important part. Ideally, it allows the dish to be prepared again with the same result. That's the other thing that's really important about this. Someone else needs to be able to look at your methodology and research design and be able to do a similar project and have similar findings. Obviously, if the participants are different, they may be slightly different, but basically the outcomes should be quite similar. So also think about your thesis as this big narrative. It's like a story, and you're leading the reader through in a very clear way. And you need to keep reminding them over and over again, your research aims, why this is important, what's the value. So think of the methods as being right in the middle there. You've set everything up. You've engaged the reader. They're really clear on your research problem. And why your study is important and your research gaps, of course. And then you're showing them your recipe and your process for undertaking the research, or if it's your proposal, of course, how you're going to do the research. And then at the end, you've got your discussion and conclusion, of course. So don't wait until your methodology or research design chapter to tell the reader what you're doing. You need to tell them from the very beginning. Your abstract should give a broad overview of your research design. The introduction should introduce it as well, and even maybe, maybe a paragraph or at least a few sentences, and then how that would link to the aim and the research questions. Of course, in the lit review, you're going to keep highlighting what other researchers do in your field, whether this is good, whether it's bad, and start to plant the seeds in the literature review about what you're going to do. So if you're doing something different to what most researchers in your field do, you need to start telling the reader that and explaining, hey, this is what previous researchers and studies have been doing, but there's all these limitations and weaknesses. Therefore, it's important to use another approach. And then that links then onto your methodology. And of course, your results. Obviously, there needs to be a really clear link there as well. Well, I'll mention it later, but I have definitely read a thesis here and there where I get to the results and there's interview data, but there was nothing about interviews in the methods chapter. So things like that can't happen. They do happen, but they shouldn't happen. Right, so a really important thing as well, of course, as you all know, research integrity. We have the Australian Code for Responsible Conduct of Research. I've got the link that I will just pop into the chat. So there's 8 principles: honesty, rigor, transparency, fairness, respect, recognition, accountability, promotion. These relate to every part of your study. You need to be constantly thinking about the research integrity and ethics of what you're doing. You know, it's about access to the research site or the materials that you need or the laboratory that you need. Have you got consent to access the data or the research setting? Is everyone protected from risk or harm, whether that's environment, animals, society as a whole? Are you using materials and disposing of them safely? Any conflicts of interest? So for example, I'm a teacher. If I was to research you guys, I would need to say, hey, I'm a teacher at QUT. Therefore, you know, I would have to minimize my bias or whatever it might be to make sure that that conflict of interest was minimized as much as possible. Okay, and QUT also has a code. You've got the Office of Research Ethics and Integrity. They are marvelous, and there's a whole stack of information. I'm going to put another link on HiQ. So go in there, and you may not know, but every faculty has research integrity advisors. Now, they, what do they do? Basically, if you have any questions or you're worried about any research within QUT, whether it is risky behavior or you think research integrity is not being followed, or you're just not sure, contact them and they'll be able to help you. And I also am going to promote an eGrad module that we have. It's a 5-week module called Research Integrity in Practice. Starts in September. It's actually really good. We go through a whole lot of examples, and yeah, it's really interesting. So enroll in that if you're wanting to know more about research integrity. So ethics, of course, really important. A lot of you have potentially already have ethics approval. You might be in the process of it. Basically, again, you're demonstrating something, aren't you? You're demonstrating your ability to have an ethical, appropriate, robust research design, your deep understanding of your approach, that you've prioritized everybody's safety. And the purpose as well is to give that step-by-step data collection and analysis process that you're going to go through. And again, enough detail so another researcher could do the study and so that the ethics panel can understand what you're doing. I really think you should seek feedback before you send it off. Just get someone to run their eye through it. If it gets sent back to you from the ethics panel or committee, that's very normal. It happens all the time. And the 2 things I would say is take it in a positive way. they're looking after everyone at QT, and they're looking after you as the principal investigator. And also it needs to be very detailed, you know. So remember, they don't know about your study like you know about your study. So you need to explain everything very clearly. So potentially that will be why there'll be just something missing, some connection missing, or some information. So, you know, if it does come back, it's because it needs to be improved, and that's usually a good thing. So try not to get upset. So yes, Office for Research Ethics and Integrity are amazing. Get help from them. And as we said, take feedback in a positive way. It's quite normal for it to come back for more information. So let's look at some examples of research integrity. So what I would like you to do, as we're looking at these examples, I'm actually going to go and sort of annotate in the slide. There's a lot of writing, I know. There was all different ways I could have done this. I felt like this was probably the best way, the quickest way. Sentences are numbered, so you can pop in the chat. Any questions about ethics, go to HiQ. All the information is there that you need, would be my advice on that link I gave you for HiQ. So yes, so in this activity, basically think about these, where are we? These principles: honesty, rigor, transparency, fairness, respect, recognition, accountability, promotion, and tell me if you can see or think of what these researchers would have had to do to get ethics approval. All right, here is number one. Now, this is from our exemplar that you're going to be looking at later, exemplar 2, the qualitative one, where this was an intervention in a classroom. Okay, so purposive sampling, anyone know what that is? Yes, high risk, probably. What's high risk about it, by the way? Look at that, 8 to 9 year olds. Yeah, anything to do with people under 18, animals, anyone who's not an adult who can make decisions on their own. Yeah, so yes, and by the way, sorry, purposive sampling, yes, choosing the children specifically to fit the selector criteria, yes. So this was investigating kids who have learning difficulties, so obviously that's what he needed for that. So yeah, children, so ethics would have been important there. Accessing NAPLAN information, so he was a teacher, so but still there's an idea there of sort of a conflict of interest potentially, so he would have had to say, yes, I'm a teacher and I'm having access to this data. What else is it? The learning difficulties were also confirmed by discussing with the classroom teacher. Okay, so there's no sort of medical diagnosis here. Yes, privacy really important. What about the parents? Would have had to talk to the parents, get confirmed consent. So let's have a look. Oh, where am I? Let's have a look and see what he did. Oh, okay, so that's interesting. I've just found out that they're going to stay up. Right, so I'm going to rub them out. All right, so he got ethics approval. So this is interesting. I would say you would want to be putting that number in. Yeah, so in the chat about the impact or risk, the welfare of the children, 100%. Yep, so permission to conduct was obtained from the principal and the regional director of education. Interesting. Informed written consent. I don't know if you guys have ever filled one of those out or given them. They're quite big documents and they talk about how you can, you know, there'll be no harm. You can pull out any time. It says where the research will be disseminated. It says everything will be private. Talks about anonymity. Maybe I can't remember if he used their real names or not. What else has he done here? So yeah, teachers, students, parents. That was interesting. Individual meetings with the parents, so that's good. So he's face to face, I guess, with the parents, and here's the informed consent and explaining everything. Yep. All cases were provided verbally and in writing. Yep. Okay. The school staff were told about it because they're impacted as well, potentially. Yeah. So there we go. So a lot would have happened beforehand, right? Now, I think what I need to do, if I go out of that and then go, no. Okay. There you go, Murray. This is a glitch we need to figure out.
No. And that says clear screen or something like that.
Oh, yeah, there is. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, that'd be the one.
Yes, it would. Okay, so this is another one. This is an interesting one. Let me just have a look. So this is an ethnography. Obviously, you can see that. This is a journal article written. The title of it is Aboriginal Healing. And it's from, the setting was in Canada. So it's an ethnographic study. I'm still in. Right. So basically the researcher, when in an ethnography, is an insider. They share the practices potentially and the behaviors of the people under investigation, usually related to a specific group, a cultural group potentially, and it's all done in a natural setting. So what about these researchers? What kind of ethics are they going through? First Nations people in Canada, how do they use healing traditions? That's interesting. Now we're talking about health issues, exploring the link. And they're talking about nursing practice. So this is what, 4 sentences. We got a fair bit of information here, haven't we? It's pretty good. And then these were the categories that came up. So probably thematic analysis. But what sort of ethics are these researchers having to look at? What about research integrity here? Any idea? Pretty similar to the last one, really. No harm. They would have had to get informed consent. They would have had to be very careful about the cultural sensitivities of their participants. Also being ethnographic, they would have had to talk about the researcher bias or how they sort of avoided those things. Yes, cultural awareness would have been really important. Potentially as an insider, they would have had a little bit of knowledge of that, but even so, that would need to be stated, wouldn't it? All right, so I'm going to try this. Let's go clear my drawings. There we go. All right, well, let's see what they did. Okay, so access was achieved through connections of one of the authors. All right, that's a good start, but we'd still need to get permission even so. And so we've got some volunteer clinical placement. There are a seniors group. Okay, so the idea of a familiar face makes sense in an ethnography, doesn't it? They did some interviews. Notice they did some pilot interviews, right, to see what was going to happen, whether the interviews, because of this, probably the sensitivity, so do a couple and make sure that those participants were okay and weren't harmed or had any, negative things come up. Then we've got written consent again. And how the study results were going to be disseminated was advised as well. And they were aware and in agreement of that. So again, a lot of things to think about, isn't it? No matter what you're doing. All right, I think we got one more. Ah, yes, this is a fun one. I've included this one. Yeah, there is a potential conflict of interest if the researcher is known to the group, and that definitely needs to be discussed as part of the research integrity and limitations, methodology, everything. See how everything's always connected, isn't it? All right, this is a really fun one. That's why I've included. But again, I want you to think about the ethics, approval, and the research integrity here. We're talking about magpies. Righto. So they live in social groups, occupying and defending, as we know, a permanent single territory, cooperatively breeding species with males and females contributing. That's pretty good. Okay, look at this. We conducted our study, Pacific Paradise, Queensland, and they found 10 individual magpies, and they were habituated to the researchers' presence. So basically, that means they sat there so that the magpies got used to them being there over 4 weeks. Then they had a trap, not set. They lured them with food for 6 weeks. They then trapped 5 of them and attached GPS trackers. All right, tell me, what ethics is happening in here? What are they got to be thinking about? Animal ethics, not harming them. Who would they need approval of to access this little gaggle of magpies? Any idea? Queensland government potentially? I would say yes. Yep. What are they feeding them exactly? So they've said what they have. So an insectivore mix, right? So it's insects, that's what they eat. So they wouldn't be harming them there. They would have to be careful when they're going in and out of wherever they were going, you know, making sure that their presence wasn't trampling the flora or interrupting any other animals. So a lot, again, that they would need to be doing. So they actually, in their journal article, they don't even say anything about ethics at all, potentially because it's a journal article. So I'll just tell you what happened though. What they found in that 6 weeks was the magpies worked together to get rid of the GPS trackers. They actually saw them, pecking them and getting them off, and they worked together. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, lol, absolutely. Yes, like dogs. And they are clever, that's right. The first magpie they tagged had it removed within an hour. Another magpie, they were on the power line trying to take it off and they fell, and then they went to a tree, and then they got it off as well. There was one baby trying to help its mum or its dad. So yeah, pretty cool. All right, let's keep going. All right, so we've finished about ethics, but just keep that in mind all the time. All right, I'm asking you a question now. Remember at the beginning, and I said, what's your philosophical worldview? What do you think about how, you know, how do we gain empirical evidence? How do we find knowledge? Perfect. We've got someone with pragmatism. Now, another thing is, this is very, very broad. There's more than these. And, you know, potentially you might not even need to talk much about this. I really want you to check with your supervisors. But remember, this is a master of philosophy and a doctor of philosophy. So in there should be something about this. Anybody else have any ideas? So usually if you're quant, you're positivist or post-positivist. If you're qual, you would be a constructivist potentially. If you're doing if you're doing action research, you think that by participating and being part of the research is how we gain knowledge. Pragmatism is just, yeah, it's centered more around the problem than theories as such. often using mixed methods, pragmatism, because, you know, then you're able to more freely, I suppose, bring in different methodologies. All right, so we're going to have a couple of look at a couple of examples again in the chat, see where you can see some clear explanations. Now, again, I'm not looking at theoretical or conceptual frameworks. Again, there's too many of them, but they are definitely sitting just under your worldview and as part of your research design, okay? So this one is our exemplar one that you might be examining later. So this is where they're investigating chronic leg ulcers. So this is interesting because he or she, I think she actually, sorry, she made up her, well, didn't make it up, constructed her own conceptual framework based on 3 existing ones, but they weren't enough, right? So she justified, talked about them, said how they are limited, and therefore adapted her own. And a lot of that was based on the lit review. And here's the problem, which is nice. All right, so there's many studies, there's national guidelines, there's consensus statements, but we still don't know enough, okay? And therefore this conceptual framework was able to guide the study. All right, what about this one? This is a good one. This is one that I use a lot as an example. So this is an investigation into the dredging at Currumbin Creek, so people can still get down into the ocean and through the creek mouth. So using computer modeling. So see how this one as well comes back to the research aim all the time, that you need to be doing that, right? So we need to look at the morphology. So that's how everything, the waves and the tides and the currents are affecting the entrance of the tidal inlet. So got all of these models using a 2D model, don't need 3D models, so justifying again. Turbidity means the clarity of the water. Justification again. All right, talking about some of the software. Therefore, we don't need the 3D, and his 2D is enough. Okay. Here's another one. Okay, so this is a mixed method investigating student experiences. So constructivist research focus on participants' lived experience based on the belief reality is subjective. Right. There's another explanation. Collect qualitative data to gain a deep understanding and then construct meanings. So this researcher thinks qualitative research methods are good and actually imperative to achieve this study's aims. But we couldn't use the positivist approach, which is quant, on its own. But if you're doing mixed methods, you don't necessarily want your worldview assumptions to limit the research methods. Neither paradigm is better than the other. So you can use both, and this is the benefit here. All right, so a lot of justifying, a lot of explaining here, a lot of information packed into one paragraph. All right, so now, how are we going for time? All right, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, that's all, to check your document and have a think and write some notes. Did you define your worldview? Remember, it doesn't matter if it's a proposal or final thesis, you'd need to mention it. Have you talked about how researchers usually position themselves? Have you linked your worldview to your problem, like the previous example we've just seen? Are you doing something new maybe? So just jump into your draft for a second and pop some notes in now. Okay, so I might just quickly go back and just explain again about these research methods. Methods are the strategies to collect and analyze. Right, what else have you got to think about? Because remember, I can't tell you every single little nitty-gritty thing today. We don't have enough time. A lot of this is just to remind you and get you on track. So if you've got instruments, scales, or experiments, you're using existing ones, developing your own, you'll need to justify every time and explain and link to your aims. Sampling strategies are really important. You cannot study an entire research population. So the magpie researchers, they couldn't do every magpie in Australia, could they? They only could do those, however many they had, 5, for example. So they sampled by going out and finding them and seeing a little group that were together. What about our intervention into the learning difficulties of the kids? You know, he can't research every single primary school kid with a learning disability. He has to have a research sample. So it's really important to say the who or the what, how you selected them. Remember, he did purposive, so purposefully selected. The size will influence reliability and validity, which we're going to look at in a second. The other thing is there's usually guidelines on what size you would need for reliability and validity. Quant is usually a big sample. Qual is a small sample. That's a really good example there of advantages and disadvantages. So a disadvantage of qualitative is you've only got a small sample, but you're getting rich data. Quantitative, you've got a big sample that you're measuring, but you're not getting as much detail potentially. Again, observations, overt, covert, do they know you're there or not? Are you recording? What type of interviews are you recording? All of this is really, really important, must be explained, justified, step by step. Data analysis is often overlooked and left to the last minute. Don't do that. It's an essential part. It all goes together. Okay, we're going to look at some examples again. I'm going to go through them quick because time is going very quickly. Right, so let's have a look. So we're looking at research methods here. See what you can see. A wave data set, right? So this is already collected data that he's using for his modeling. This is the researcher looking at Currumbin Creek. So he's got different time scales, accuracy levels, blah, blah, blah. So there was wave rider buoys that are out getting wave data that you didn't know about out in the ocean. He's got that data from the council. Yep, the directions of the waves. So he had all of that, put it into his little modeling. What else did he do? Yeah, because he's looking at how the sediment is building up, remember? So waves are important and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so a lot of information there. I'm going to clear that one and we'll go on. This is an interesting one. This is our teacher with the intervention for the kids. Think aloud analysis. So what was SRL? I've actually forgotten. Something learning. Self-regulated learning data. through semi-structured interviews. So let's have a look at his step-by-step. So he had a reading exercise based on a fable, The Greedy Dog and the Bone. Why did he select that one? So he's justified. Yep, telling us again the age of the kids. Right, he's introducing questions. So a think aloud analysis. So he's asking them, he's reading the story and asking them to think about what their thoughts are as he goes through. So they've had a look at the book, and then he's asking them to think about whether they thought it would be a good story. What are you thinking? What happened? Is there anything else? Lasted 20 minutes. Written notes, audio recordings. Yeah. Then he used another one. So he's done this before the intervention, and then he's done a post-intervention. So if we wanted to do a think aloud analysis ourselves, do you think that this would give us enough to start? Probably. He's probably got a lot more in there too, but it's a good start. So I really want you to look at, as we're looking through, you know, this is a well-structured paragraph, and we're pretty clear in this one paragraph on what he did. All right, this one is a physics research proposal, stage 2, about 3D printing. So what do you think about this? Do you reckon you'd be able to do beam shaping? Okay, so he's using microscopes and lasers, so he can adjust the parameters. Only been recent interest. And he's going to use these 2 methods. He's given us the software. What about this? What do you think of this? I think that's good. He's telling us, hey, I don't have time to develop the model. Someone else is doing that, but we're in the lab together. So I think that's an interesting thing. Many of you might be doing something similar if you're in the sciences. This is back to our lady investigating the Aboriginal healing in Canada. Okay. So she's talking about ethnography and why it's useful. It's participation with the aim of bringing action. Right, so what action does she want? Healthier, I think they were older people, weren't they? And help for the nurses to utilize these, you know, any kind of cultural methods that they use that might help the nurses to understand what's happening if they're not well. Cultural sensitivity, as we said, was important. Okay, so there's a nice justification there of using ethnography in this one. This is a research article, remember, as well. All right, so have a look at your document now. Remember at the beginning, and I said, write down your data collection tools, your data analysis, go in and have a look and have a think about if you've already written these. Do you think you've explained clearly enough and justified? Maybe you need to add some more. Do you think another researcher would be able to replicate your study based on what you've written? And then have you linked back to the aims and the research questions, and do you have a clear data analysis strategy linked there as well? So again, I'm just going to give you 2 minutes and then we're going to move on again. All right, I know I haven't given you much time, but we are going to move on. Validity and reliability. Now, it might be not called exactly that for you. There might be a whole other different way that you're proving and justifying the robustness and reliability and trustworthiness of your research. We're going to go with reliability and validity today. So reliability is basically whether the measurement is consistent and repeatable. Validity is the instrument or the measurement accurate? Does it test what it's intended to test? Now, if you're using a scale that's already been used by other researchers, it would have already been validated. So that's pretty easy for you to then go and use that. If you're making your own scale, you might need to say how you validated it as well, so that we'll have a look at an example of that shortly. But a really simple example is a set of scales, right? If I had was researching some patients for some reason, medical participants, and we needed to weigh them into, in intervals, we would want to use the same scale so that we know it's reliable, and we would want to test the scale every time to make sure it's actually controlled and always measuring accurately. A really good way to demonstrate what this means is a dartboard. I hope that you can sort of see that. So a measurement or a scale can be reliable, meaning it's measuring what you wanted it to measure, but not valid, right? Sorry, other way around. Reliability, it's repeatable and we can use it again, but it's not measuring what we think it's measuring. And that's why you have to be really careful with any kind of scale or measurement. So for example, a Likert scale, if the questions are ambiguous, it's not going to really give you the valid and reliable results that you want, because respondents might misinterpret your questions and not give the answer that you're after or that you were wanting to find. So you can see there the black dots. So we've got a reliable measurement or scale because everything's, it's hitting the same spot every time, but not the middle of the target. So it's not valid. Okay, so it's not accurate. It's reliable. We're hitting the right spot every time, but it's not accurate because it's not hitting the middle. You've got the blue dots. They're not valid or reliable. They're everywhere, all over the place. They're not consistent and they're not accurate either. The green dots are both. They're valid and reliable. We're hitting the spot every time, and we're hitting the spot that we want to spot, which that we want to hit, which is the middle of the dartboard. Let's have a look at an example. Here's some case studies. So what can researchers do to make sure that their results and their research approach and methodology and methods are valid and reliable? So we want systematic actions. So in this case, in case study, it's a research protocol, so that you use the same approach and process and steps every time. You can use, sometimes we call it triangulation, depends if you've got three. So increasing the validity was by getting in-depth responses, planning in advance, following up to make sure the interpretation was correct, writing up the notes on the day, validating participants' claims using documents, and being thorough with the data. Okay, so there's an example there of valid and reliable, or attempting. The questionnaire, what have we got this time? So the dependability to measure the intended variables needs to be checked, right? So supervisor, statistician, this was one that was developed for the research. So then also a pilot study, that's always a good idea as well. 15 students, EAL, English as an additional language. Now, whether you include the pilot study or not, up to you. In this case, wasn't included. Computer modeling, again, everything we do needs to be justified and linked and trustworthy. accuracy, deemed satisfactory, calibration, comparing, satisfactory ranges, reassures the suitability of the calibration parameters. Yep, therefore the model was confidently used. So, you know, you don't have to say a lot, but you do have to say something. Classroom intervention. So remember the teacher and the students. I'm going to keep going though, because we do have to move. So he's got multiple methods to help with the reliability and the validity. He's recognizing that qualitative data, that the interpretations are subjective. We've already talked about that. So that comes to researcher bias because, you know, he is an insider, so to speak. He's the teacher. Yeah, he's saying, well, you know, there could have been an impact of these things. He could have had a control group, would have been more work. He already did a lot of work anyway, so it wasn't possible. Okay. All right, so talking about that leads us into our research limitations. All research methods and methodologies have limitations, okay? They just do. Some have it, there's advantages, there's disadvantages. It's a reason for potentially doing mixed, so you can minimize those. So you need to state this. You might put it in your conclusion chapter. You might put it just in your methodology chapter, just see what your supervisor likes. Often these limitations are then linked to further research. Okay, so a limitation was that the sample wasn't very big, so we need bigger samples. That's a simple one there. Let's have a look at some examples. Right, we need to acknowledge the limitations. This is from the wound care thesis. So he used data from previous studies, or she. Small numbers in some variables limited the findings. Limited number of psychosocial category. And some factors had low prevalence. So we need some larger sizes. So again, you don't have to say much. You've just got to acknowledge. Okay, rationale for using quant and qualitative was to reduce, but there's still limitations. So the sample size needed to be 181. So that's a calculation for survey participants. It could be different by now, but it wasn't feasible to use probability sampling for that. But nevertheless, the demographics reflected the population under investigation. And it was not the main data collection or methodology. So it was informing the case study. So it was enough to do that. But if it had been the main phase, it wouldn't have been enough. Timing, there wasn't enough time or money for another researcher to look at the transcriptions, but it's okay. Someone, Lichtman, says it's all right if you do your own transcribing. So all the quotes were double checked. So again, you don't have to do much, but you just have to, acknowledge that there's advantages and disadvantages. And it's not a bad thing. Every methodology will have that, and every data collection method. All right, sorry. So we are looking at now explaining and justifying. All right, what do examiners expect? That's a good question, isn't it? They're going to be your really important readers ultimately. So they want a clear, researchable hypothesis, question, or problem, and they want the approach and methodology to link and, of course, to be well explained. This is a chapter they will go through with a fine-tooth comb. All right. They will with everything, of course, but this is the one they will really be interested in, because this is how you find out, you know, your evidence and then your interpretations and conclusions. So as we said before, you need to acknowledge the limitations and how you minimize them. They're not going to say, oh, you shouldn't have done that because there's limitations, because you are going to acknowledge, right, and say what you did to limit those. Need consistency. Don't say that you're going to do something and then not do it, and vice versa. You'd be amazed what I see in a thesis. I think I just said before, I've gone to results and there's interview data, but there was nothing in the methodology about interviews. That's no good. So they will have their own worldviews, of course, but they are open to learning about other methodologies. They're interested, and usually they're selected based on an affinity to a similar methodology to yours anyway. So getting started, what's your research about? Have you identified it clearly in those beginning chapters or sections? Is it obtainable? Have you talked about gaining access to the participants, to the site, the setting, documents? Do you need money for equipment? Do you need to travel somewhere? Have you got the skills to do this? Do you need to learn something new? Does everything link? Are you prioritizing their safety? What's your underpinning research question and aim? What strategy is going to help you to answer that question? What do you already know? So a lot of things to think about at the start. My advice, one problem, make it manageable. It's okay if it's small. You cannot solve world peace, unfortunately, and you don't need to. You need a significant contribution for sure, but that can be small, right? As long as it's valuable to someone, somewhere, which it will be to your stakeholders. So don't try to do too much. You've got to justify everything. I know I keep saying that, but it is just so, so important. That is what your reader will be looking for. If you're going for your stage 2, your confirmation seminar, your final seminar, your MPhil final seminar, you will be asked questions. You've got to be ready to answer those. So think of the questions. They are going to ask you, why did you go with that theory and not this other theory? You need to know why, right? You don't have to talk up, sorry, you do talk up the theory that you're using or the concepts or whatever, or framework. You don't have to say why you're not using the other ones, but you really need to justify very clearly and strongly, and why are you collecting data from these people and not somebody else? Why the students, not the teachers? Why the teachers, not the students? You know, so why are you doing that experiment? Why aren't you doing it on this other experiment? So you need to be ready for that. All right. As I keep saying, use books. You really need to have a deep understanding of every aspect. Ask questions, previous studies. Come back to your philosophy. Is it still linking? Use that as a justification and link it back to your aims, your topic. What kind of questions have you got? Do you need a big, broad overview, or do you need to find out people's lived experiences? Do you need to do 5 experiments rather than just 1 experiment to figure out all of the different moving parts of the research topic that you have? You will have seminal authors most likely around your methodology. So for case studies, it's Yin. So, you know, find out who that is. And as I keep saying, a justification for not doing something is time, or the fact that you're one person. Or you could be doing like our physics guy was doing, where he's within a lab and he's saying, okay, I need this information, but someone else is working on that, and I'm going to take that and utilize it to then build and expand. Okay, a couple of examples now. Okay, this is our Currumbin Creek. Checking to see how we can stop the creek mouth from filling up with sand, because at the moment there's dredging every day and it costs money. So the justification was the need to collect as much concurrent data as possible for the calibration and validation. Talking about the software. What he did to guarantee an accurate, acceptable representation and to get that better and increased understanding. This is our teacher doing his intervention. All right, so his selected data gathering methods have been informed by previous research. Great. He chose them related to their educational setting, a range of methods so that he could have reliable and valid data, combined informal and formal approaches, and used multiple methods to uncover relationships. Okay, so again, one paragraph and we've got a really good idea of some justification there. Here's another one. This is again the mixed methods. So EAL, English as an additional language, so students whose English is not their first language. So we needed to generate meaningful insights into their lived experiences. So we had explanatory, qualitative, and quantitative research. Interestingly, not called mixed methods. I don't know if you noticed that. The reason being, it's a constructivist worldview, not a pragmatic worldview. So that's why. So survey questionnaire, multiple embedded case studies. This is explaining what explanatory means. There's Creswell again. So explanatory research usually has been associated with quantitative, but now acceptable in qualitative. And if Creswell says, then it's true, right? This is about case studies. There's Yin, he's the guru. We need multiple sources of evidence. Been used for decades in this kind of research. Can contribute valuable knowledge. A lot of justification here. Influential in education. Explanatory case studies. Blah, 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 blah. So again, one paragraph. I want you to notice too, this is a really good example of synthesizing. So there's not just Yin. We got 1, 2, we've got Duff, Van Leer, Harland. Okay, all of these people are seminal researchers to do with case studies, or Harland to do with writing anyway. That's why you need to know your seminal authors for your field. All right, so structure, what are you doing? Right, remember we're talking about your how you're going to explain and justify and stay on track. You're going to go broad to narrow. Philosophy, approach, methodology, methods, limitations, all explained and justified over and over again. A couple more examples. This time we're going to look at the tables of content. So tables of content should always shed light on the information in that particular chapter. So of course we're looking at the methodology chapter. Let's have a look if we can see any light shed. What's this one? So this is the teacher. He's doing the intervention. Yep, so we can see he's got case studies. He's going to talk about his participants. He's talking about his data collection methods, his analysis, his validity, and his ethics, because we know with the kids, really important. this one is, this is interesting. This is our infected leg ulcers, which you're going to look at, or some of you are going to look at in a minute. By publication, this one. So check out his table of contents. He's got a conceptual framework, or her, I think her. Remember the conceptual framework based on previous ones, but adapted and improved. So study 1 and study 1 methodology results, study 2 methodology results, study 3 methodology results. You can see there's an article 3 and article 2. So yep, that's a thesis by publication. This is our computer modeling for Currumbin Creek. A lot going on there, but can you see how these table of contents really gives us a good idea from the very beginning what exactly we're in for when we're reading this thesis? And I need your table of contents to be exactly the same, shedding light, not ambiguous, and having us look at it and go, I don't actually know what you're doing. All right, really important. Don't make the reader wait. All right, we're nearly up to our exemplars, actually. We're not doing too bad for time. So this is probably one of the last bits that we need to do. Yep, we're almost there. So don't make the reader wait. You need clear explanations right at the beginning. Remember, I already said in the abstract and the introduction, if I am on page 10 of your thesis or your research proposal or your confirmation document, and I still don't know what your research design is, that is bad. Okay, you need it at the very beginning, in the first paragraph of chapter 1 or your proposal. What's the aim of the study? What's the worldview? Potentially, maybe you wouldn't need that at this point, but certainly your design methodology, something about how the data was collected, and of course, how the section or chapter is structured. So a lot of information to put in the beginning, isn't it? So at the beginning of the methods chapter I'm talking about here, let's have a look at some examples. Write in the chat if you see anything interesting. Okay, this is the first paragraph of the mixed methods study that we've been looking at. Well, the quantitative and qualitative. So there's the aim, research setting, when, theoretical framework, research methods need to do this. So therefore, we had this, blah, 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 blah. This is what's in the chapter. Okay, so you need to pack a lot of information in the beginning of every single chapter. All right, now you're going to check your document. Do you have that beginning paragraph that has the study and the study aim and the aim and the function of the section or the chapter? Have you mentioned your research design and methodology and how the chapter is structured? Because we really need that at the beginning of the chapter. I'm going to give you 2 minutes again. Okay, we're going to keep going. So staying on track, you might have to keep going back to the literature. You need those strategic discussions with your supervisors as well, of course. Seek feedback. If you're stuck, go back. Who are your stakeholders? Look at some different angles and perspectives. And it's really important as well in that when you're designing and getting everything together as to how you're going to implement this study, think about how you're going to present the data as well, okay, because that can be difficult, and you want to align it with your methodology chapter as well. Common mistakes to avoid: no introductory paragraph. You're all going to have those. rushing in with information about methods or analysis before you've given us that beautiful overview at the beginning. You can't start talking about your questionnaire if you haven't already told us about your survey methodology. Irrelevant information, if it doesn't help the reader, leave it out. Don't go and explain why you're not using something. Justify why you are using what you're using. You need to explain every step. Sometimes it can be hard to structure, but methods should be in sequential order of the steps. You will need to go back to your proposal or your confirmation document and make adjustments. You must. I often see that people haven't done that. You need to explain all the connections. You need to explain any technical concepts. Seek feedback widely and often. Be an effective participant in that two-way dialogue. Think about tense. Yeah, I'm talking about tense again. In your proposal, you are in future tense. In your final thesis, you are in past tense. You're describing what you did. I've seen it so many times. I read a final thesis and the methodology chapter is still in future tense. Not happy. It shouldn't be. You must be going back and double checking everything and refining and revising. When you're explaining and justifying approaches, you're using present tense because it is what it is now. Harland argues, right? Final thesis, yep, revise the tense. Manchester phrase bank, if you're getting a bit stuck, it has so many great sentence starters for you. Try that. All right, finally, let's examine an exemplar. Righto. Now, we haven't got many of you here, so what I want you to do is put into the chat whether you want the qual or the quant. Now, exemplar 1 is the quant, exemplar 2 is the qual. For you people who've been coming to the results and discussion writing circles, yep, we're using the same exemplars because I think that's good. So let's go. Put in the chat now which one you want so I can put you in the right room. Okay, thanks, Christine. So you're doing the qual. All right, so while you guys are doing that, I actually want you to go in and start reading. All right, go to the exemplar you've selected. 10 minutes. Yeah, probably not. I'm probably only going to give you 5. So go into exemplar 1 if you're doing the quant. Go into exemplar 2 if you're doing the qual. So I'm going to give you time now to read, and then I'm going to pop you in your breakout rooms shortly. All right, so we went through a lot today. It was pretty jam-packed, but if you want more, we do have some more writing sessions coming up, as you can see there. And you can always use our Blackboard resources, which is where the link that Murray or that I gave you at the beginning for Blackboard, that's where everything's recorded, and you'll be able to find a whole lot of resources there. So the main takeaways, you take all the training opportunities to learn about methods, methodologies, read books, ask questions, talk to your supervisors, get that really deep understanding of exactly what you're doing and why, so that when you get those questions that you inevitably will get, why that theory, why that methodology, why are those participants? You will get those, I promise. So you want to be very clear and strong on why you're doing what you're doing. and it needs to obviously link to your aims, your problem, your research questions. That's going to help you stay on track. Don't forget about research integrity as well, of course, and seek feedback on the clarity and readability. So those exemplars that we've looked at today, they're all clear, well explained. The readability is there. Everything we need is in each paragraph. And those longer exemplars that you just looked at, you know, they're not perfect, but, you know, we can follow and understand what is happening even when we haven't read the whole thesis, you know, and that's really important. That's what you're aiming for as well. To help with getting feedback, we've got our peer feedback sessions. Please come along. They've been going really well. It's not scary. You will, I'm just going to pop the link in the chat. You want to register, so you can see there's one next week. Try to have 2 or 3 every month. We also have the HDR Writers Lounge, where you can do your draft writing, you write in sprints, you get to connect with your peers as well. So if you can click on that QR code, or I'll give you the link to the survey. I would love for your feedback. Too much information, not enough information. I went too quickly, most probably. But hopefully, as I said, the goal today was to just prompt you to remind you of really important aspects of your chapter, to get you thinking about that scaffolding, and remember about the difference between methodology and methods, and that everything's funneling down from your philosophical worldview. Yes, the figure, I screenshot that because I couldn't sort of cut and paste it. Yeah, absolutely. You can have figures in your methodology. You know, remember the other one I showed you with the phases of the qualitative and quantitative, you know, give it a go, see what your supervisors think and whether they think you can put it in. Coming up, as I said, peer feedback session. There's a writers lounge next Wednesday. There's a HDR careers Q&A. They're always great. They won't be on at the same time, even though they're on the same day there. Go to HiQ for all of your training needs. Pop that link into the chat. And if you need more information, you've always got those HDR matters that come to you every week. You've got the skills assessment tool, which is great for all those transferable skills you can see in the image there. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunities for your training. Blackboard, of course, for the resources for your self-paced. Right, we have 4 minutes for questions. Pop them in the chat, turn on your mic. A lot of people have had to go, but that's okay. We're still all here. Anyone got a question? Thoughts? I know it was a lot, but that's why I put the slides up straight away, so you've got them, and I'll send an email with the recording in case you need that. Can the same techniques be used to write up the methodology? Yep, absolutely. It'll just be squished in a lot smaller. Your methodology chapter in a final thesis might be 10,000 words, might be more, right? You've probably only got, I don't know, 200 or 300 in an article. You probably aren't going to talk about worldview, okay? It's not important. That depends, might be, depends what your topic is, but generally you're going to focus on your methodology and your methods. Exemplars for confirmation documents, not through HiQ, no. I mean, I have a few that I pull from, but they've been given to me to use, you know, in the classes, not to sort of send through. Ask your supervisor is a good idea. Or email me email me, Sentha, and I'll see what I can do. kerry.freeman@qut.edu.au. Yeah, slim version for a paper of the research info. Yes, definitely. Good description. Yeah, 10,000 words compared to about 200 or 300. So very squished. Yeah, and also, it depends on your journal and your topic as well. Look at other ones in the journal you're targeting. All right, excellent.